boardroom was chillingly silent when Corinne's knees finally gave out. Battered, exhausted, and carrying the dangerous secrets of a corrupt firm, she expected to hit the cold marble floor. Instead, a pair of massive, scarred hands caught her heavy frame with effortless grace, altering her destiny forever. Corinne Harris gripped the edge of the cold porcelain sink in the executive washroom, her knuckles turning a pale, sickly white. She kept her eyes fixed on the marble countertop, delaying the inevitable moment she would have to look at her own reflection. When she finally raised her head, the harsh, fluorescent lights of the Davies and Cumder Logistics building offered no mercy. She carefully dabbed another layer of heavy, theatrical concealer over her left cheekbone. The dark, ugly purple of the bruise was stubbornly resisting the makeup, a glaring testament to the events of the previous night. Corinne was a fat woman, a physical reality she had spent her 28 years learning to carry with a soft, unapologetic grace. She knew how to dress her curves in tailored, professional blazers and wide-leg trousers that commanded respect in the male-dominated accounting world. But today, her own body felt like a suffocating trap. Every extra pound she carried seemed to pull down on her battered muscles, amplifying the agonizing, sharp ache in her ribs with every shallow breath she took. "Just get through the meeting," she whispered to her reflection, her voice trembling. "Just hand over the ledgers, smile, and get out." The door to the washroom violently swung open, rebounding off the tiled wall with a deafening crack. Richard Davies stepped inside, his face flushed and his expensive silk tie slightly askew. Richard was the CEO of the firm, a man whose public charisma perfectly masked the vicious, desperate, cornered animal he truly was. "Are you done painting your face, Corinne?" Richard spat, his voice a low, venomous hiss as he invaded her personal space. He didn't care that he was in the women's restroom. "They are waiting, and if you so much as stutter when they look at the Q3 projections, what happened last night will feel like a gentle massage." Corinne instinctively shrank back, her heart hammering wildly against her injured ribcage. Last night, after discovering a massive, inexplicable black hole in the company's offshore accounts, she had confronted Richard. She hadn't realized that Davies and Company wasn't just hiding money from the IRS. They were laundering money for one of the most ruthless syndicates on the eastern seaboard. Richard's response to her discovery hadn't been an explanation. It had been a heavy, brass-weighted paperweight swung wildly into her ribs, followed by a backhand across her face that sent her sprawling to the carpet. He had kept her locked in her office overnight, terrified and in agonizing pain, to ensure she doctored the final reports for today's acquisition meeting. "I understand, Mr. Davies," Corinne managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. She smoothed down her tailored navy blazer, wincing as the fabric pulled against her side. "Good," Richard sneered, his eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. "These aren't venture capitalists, Corinne. If Domenico Rexha senses a single discrepancy in those ledgers, we are both dead. But I promise you, I will make sure you die first." With that chilling promise hanging in the stale air, Richard turned and marched out. Corinne took one last, shuddering breath, picked up the thick leather binder containing the falsified financial records, and followed him into the lion's den. The executive boardroom was a sprawling expanse of glass and polished mahogany, overlooking the grey, overcast skyline of the city. The temperature in the room was set uncomfortably low, yet the atmosphere was thick with a suffocating, almost electric tension. Seated at the far end of the long table was Domenico Rexha. Corinne had heard the whispers around the water cooler, rumors of a shadowy, powerful Italian investor looking to buy out their struggling logistics network. Seeing him in person, the rumors felt entirely inadequate. Domenico was an imposing fortress of a man. He didn't wear the flashy, ostentatious suits of a corporate raider. His charcoal suit was immaculately tailored, settling over broad, heavy shoulders that spoke of brutal, physical power rather than boardroom politics. His dark hair was swept back, lightly silvered at the temples, and his jaw was covered in a neat, dark shadow of scruff. But it was his hands that drew Corinne's immediate attention. They were resting flat on the mahogany table, massive, scarred, and completely still. They were the hands of a man who had built an empire from the dirt up, capable of immense violence, yet currently exuding a terrifying absolute control. Beside him sat his underboss, Matteo Rossi, a leaner, sharper-looking man who was busy typing away on a secured tablet. "Mr. Rexer," Richard announced, his voice suddenly adopting a jovial, overly confident boom that made Corinne's stomach turn. "Thank you for your patience. This is my chief auditor, Corinne Harris. She has personally finalized the last 3 years of our operational ledgers for your review." Domenico slowly shifted his gaze from Richard to Corinne. His eyes were a piercing, bottomless black. They didn't just look at her. They seemed to dismantle her. Corinne felt a hot flush of shame and fear creep up her neck. She was acutely aware of her size under his intense scrutiny, used to the dismissive or judgmental glances of powerful men. But Domenico's gaze held no mockery. Instead, his eyes narrowed infinitesimally as they tracked her slow, agonizingly stiff walk from the doorway to the projector screen. "Miss Harris," Domenico's voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. It was accented, rich, and dangerously calm. "I appreciate your diligence. Let us begin. I have particular interest in the freight routing costs from the Miami port." Corinne nodded tightly, setting the heavy binder down on the podium. Her hands were shaking. She opened the folder, the crisp white pages of the falsified documents mocking her integrity. She was a good accountant. She was an honest person. And now she was standing in front of a mafia boss, about to sell him a lie that could get her killed. The presentation dragged on for what felt like an eternity. Corinne stood at the head of the table, clicking through the slides, her voice tight and entirely devoid of its usual confident cadence. Every time she spoke a fraudulent number, a fresh wave of nausea washed over her. The physical toll of standing upright was becoming unbearable. The adrenaline that had fueled her through the morning was rapidly crashing, leaving behind a raw, searing agony. Her bruised rib felt as though it were actively splintering into her lung with every breath. Beneath her conservative white blouse and navy blazer, she was drenched in a cold, clammy sweat. Richard sat to her right, his eyes boring holes into the side of her head, silently threatening her every time she paused for a fraction of a second too long. "Slide 14 details the warehouse maintenance overhead," Corinne said, her voice cracking slightly. She cleared her throat, trying to mask the grimace that twisted her face. She subtly shifted her weight, heavily leaning her hip against the wooden podium to take some of the pressure off her aching core. Domenico had not looked at the projection screen in over 10 minutes. While Richard and Matteo discussed the numbers, Domenico's dark, predatory focus remained entirely fixed on Corinne. He was a man whose survival depended on reading the imperceptible details that others missed. He saw the unnatural rigidity in her posture. He noticed the way she protectively kept her left arm, pinned against her waist, refusing to use it to gesture. He saw the heavy layer of makeup that didn't quite match the pale, clammy skin of her neck, and the slight, involuntary flinches that seized her thick frame whenever Richard spoke. Domenico leaned forward, intertwining his massive fingers. The quiet sound of his knuckles popping silenced the room instantly. Richard swallowed hard, cutting off his own sentence. "Miss Harris," Domenico said smoothly, cutting through the corporate jargon. "You say the maintenance costs have decreased by 12%, yet the volume of cargo has doubled. How do you explain this miraculous efficiency?" Corinne froze. That was the exact black hole she had discovered. The maintenance budget was being funneled into shell companies to clean Domenico's own rivals' money. A double cross Richard was pulling behind the mafia boss's back. She opened her mouth to speak, to feed him the lie Richard had practically beaten into her skull. The new automated sorting systems, sir. Suddenly, a sharp, white-hot spike of pain erupted in her side, so intense it robbed her of her vision for a terrifying second. Corinne gasped, a wet, rattling sound, and her hand shot to her ribcage, pressing hard against the blazer. "Corinne!" Richard barked, panic making his voice sharp. "Answer Mr. Rexa's question properly. Stand up straight." She tried. She desperately tried to obey, terrified of Richard's wrath, terrified of Domenico's silence. But her body, pushed beyond its absolute limits, finally staged a rebellion. The edges of her vision tunneled into darkness. The hum of the air conditioner faded into a high-pitched ringing. The heavy, falsified ledger slipped from her numb fingers, hitting the floor with a loud, echoing thwack. I can't," Corinne whispered, her eyes rolling back. Her heavy frame swayed violently, and then her legs completely gave out beneath her. She didn't fall gracefully. It was a terrifying, dead-weight collapse. Richard let out a shout of shock and instinctively pushed his rolling chair backward, moving away from her, completely unwilling to help. Corinne braced her mind for the shattering impact of the marble floor. But the impact never came. A blur of charcoal wool and the scent of expensive cologne and dark coffee swept across the room with a speed that defied logic. Domenico Rexa, a man of immense size and terrifying reputation, had crossed the distance from the table to the podium in a heartbeat. Before her knees could even strike the ground, a pair of massive, rock-steady hands clamped around her waist and back. The sheer physical power of his grip halted her agonizing fall instantly. Domenico grunted softly under the sudden, heavy weight, but his stance remained absolutely unyielding. He didn't stumble. He held her large, unconscious form against his broad chest as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. As she slumped against him, her blazer rode up slightly, and the violent, unnatural angle of her posture pressed against his arm. Domenico's large right hand, splayed wide across her back to support her, felt the distinct, rigid swelling of heavily bruised, possibly fractured ribs through her silk blouse. His eyes, previously calm and calculating, snapped up to glare at Richard. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet below freezing. "She fainted," Richard stammered, his face draining of color as he scrambled to his feet. "I apologize, Mr. Rexa. She's always been of poor health. Her weight, you know. I'll have security remove her immediately, and we can—" "Silence!" Domenico's voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, guttural growl that resonated with lethal intent. Matteo was already on his feet, his hand casually resting inside his jacket, effectively blocking the boardroom doors. Domenico slowly lowered Corinne to the plush carpet, moving with a surprising, gentle care that contrasted violently with the murderous aura radiating from him. He knelt beside her, his massive hand softly brushing the hair away from her face. In doing so, his thumb grazed the heavy concealer on her cheek. The makeup smeared onto his calloused skin, revealing the ugly, jagged edges of the dark purple bruise beneath. Domenico stared at the makeup on his thumb for a long, silent moment. When he finally lifted his head to look at Richard Davies, the corporate CEO realized, with sudden, bowel-clenching terror, that the business meeting was officially over. "Matteo," Domenico said softly, his eyes locked onto the trembling CEO. "Lock the doors. Mr. Davies and I are going to have a conversation about how he treats his employees." The first thing Corinne registered was the scent of crisp, expensive linen and the faint, sterile trace of medical alcohol. She did not wake up to the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of the Davies and Cumberland washroom, nor the terrifying, cold marble of the boardroom floor. Instead, her eyes fluttered open to a dimly lit, cavernous bedroom that exuded quiet, old-world wealth. The walls were painted a deep, soothing charcoal, and heavy velvet curtains blocked out the city skyline. She was lying on a mattress so impossibly thick and supportive it felt like resting on a cloud. Instinctively she tensed, bracing for the sharp, splintering agony in her side. But the pain was surprisingly distant, muffled by a steady, comforting numbness. As she shifted her heavy frame, she realized she was wearing a silk nightgown that draped beautifully over her curves, and a snug, professional medical binding was wrapped securely around her ribcage. "Do not try to sit up too quickly, Miss Harris." The voice came from a leather armchair in the corner of the room. A man in a pristine white coat stood up, adjusting his silver-rimmed glasses. He looked incredibly familiar. It took Corinne's groggy mind a moment to place him. It was Dr. James Andrews, the world-renowned orthopedic specialist whose private clinic catered exclusively to elite athletes and billionaires. Seeing a real, highly publicized private figure standing in this shadowy room was a jarring anchor to reality. "Dr. Andrews?" Corinne rasped, her throat dry. "What? Where am I?" "You are a guest in Mr. Rexer's private residence," Dr. Andrews replied in a calming, clinical tone, checking the IV line connected to the back of her hand. "You suffered 2 fractured ribs, severe deep tissue contusions, and a mild concussion. Mr. Rexer had me flown in from Birmingham on his private jet the moment you lost consciousness. You are very fortunate. The angle of the fracture was millimeters away from puncturing a lung. You require absolute rest." Before Corinne could process the sheer logistical impossibility of a mafia boss flying in a celebrity surgeon just to treat an accountant, the heavy oak doors of the bedroom opened. Domenico Rexer stepped inside. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, the sleeves rolled up to reveal thick forearms corded with muscle and faded, intricate ink. Without the corporate armor, he looked even larger, a towering force of nature that instantly commanded the vast room. Yet, when his dark eyes locked onto Corinne, the predatory edge that had terrified Richard Davies was entirely absent. In its place was a heavy, simmering warmth. "Thank you, Doctor. Give us the room," Domenico commanded softly. Dr. Andrews nodded professionally, gathered his tablet, and exited, leaving Corinne utterly alone with the most dangerous man on the eastern seaboard. Domenico crossed the room slowly, his footsteps silent on the Persian rug. He pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat down. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. He didn't look at her with the thinly veiled disgust she was so used to receiving from men in power. His gaze swept over the soft, full shape of her face, the thick cascade of her dark hair spread across the pillows, and the substantial, beautiful curves hidden beneath the silk. He looked at her as if she were a masterpiece he had miraculously stumbled upon. "How do you feel, Corinne?" he asked, his deep, rumbling voice wrapping around her name like a physical caress. "Confused," Corinne admitted, her voice trembling slightly. She pulled the silk sheet higher over her chest, suddenly feeling terribly exposed. "Mr. Rexer, the ledgers. I need to tell you, I know about the ledgers," Domenico interrupted gently. He leaned forward, resting his massive elbows on his knees. "I know Richard Davies was cooking the books. I know he was skimming from the transit budgets." Corinne's breath hitched. You knew? But then why did you come to the meeting?" A dark, dangerous shadow crossed Domenico's face. "Because I needed to confirm who he was funneling the money to," Richard believed he was very clever. He thought he could use my legitimate acquisition as a shield while he laundered millions for the Calabrian syndicate, the very men who murdered my uncle 5 years ago. I attended that meeting to look him in the eye before I dismantled his life. Corinne shuddered at the absolute certainty in his voice. Where is he? What did you do to him? Let us just say that Richard Davies will no longer be an issue for you or anyone else, Domenico said, his tone chillingly flat. My security team, contracted through a highly discreet division of Garda World, escorted him to a private facility. He is currently writing a very detailed confession that will be delivered to the federal prosecutor's office. He is going to spend the rest of his miserable life in a concrete box. Domenico reached out. Corinne flinched out of pure, conditioned habit, but his huge hand simply bypassed her face and gently grasped her trembling fingers. His palm was rough, calloused from years of hardship, but his touch was incredibly reverent. When you collapsed, Domenico murmured, his eyes darkening with a fierce, possessive fury. And I felt the damage he had inflicted upon your body. It took every ounce of discipline I possess not to snap his neck in front of you. No one will ever lay a hostile hand on you again, Corinne. That is a vow. Corinne stared at their joined hands. The sheer size of his hand completely engulfed hers, making her feel small and protected in a way she had never experienced. For her entire adult life, her weight had made her feel like a target for ridicule or a background fixture to be ignored. Domenico made her feel like the absolute center of the universe. Why are you doing this for me? She whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. I'm just an accountant. I lied to you. Domenico reached up with his free hand, his thick thumb gently wiping the tear away. He didn't smear the makeup this time. His staff had carefully cleaned her face while she slept, leaving her bruised but completely bare and authentic. You didn't lie, mea cara, he corrected softly. Your body told the truth when your voice could not. You are a woman of immense bravery. You carried the weight of a criminal enterprise on your shoulders and refused to break until your body forced you to. You are brilliant, beautiful, and remarkably strong. And I protect what is mine. The quiet sanctuary of the bedroom was shattered 3 hours later. The doors burst open, and Matteo Rossi sprinted into the room, his usual composed demeanor entirely fractured. He was holding a secured, encrypted laptop. Boss, we have a massive problem, Matteo said, his eyes darting apologetically to Corinne before fixing on Domenico. Richard had a dead man's switch. When he didn't check into his office server at noon, an automated protocol executed. The Calabrians are actively draining the offshore transit accounts. They are routing it through a dozen shell companies in the Caymans. If they empty those accounts, they take our capital, and they pin the federal wire fraud directly on your name. Domenico stood up, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. Have our tech division sever the connection. They can't, Matteo groaned in frustration. Richard used a rolling encryption tied to the logistics firm's internal mainframe. Our guys are locked out. We are watching $50 million evaporate in real time. Domenico cursed softly in Italian, running a hand through his dark hair. This was the ultimate twist. Richard, the cowardly rat, had set a trap to ensure that if he went down, the Mafia boss would take the fall. From the bed, Corinne slowly pushed herself up. The painkillers dulled the sharp edges, but a heavy ache radiated through her chest. Give me the laptop, she said, her voice unexpectedly clear and commanding. Both men turned to look at her. Corinne, no, Domenico said immediately, stepping toward her. You are injured. You need to rest. I will handle this. Domenico, your tech guys don't know Davies and Company's architecture, Corinne insisted, ignoring the pain as she swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. Her bare feet touched the thick Persian rug. Richard was arrogant. He didn't build that encryption himself. He stole the framework from a beta test we ran 3 years ago. I was the lead auditor on that project. I know the back doors. Matteo looked at Domenico, a silent plea in his eyes. Every second they wasted cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Domenico stared at Corinne. He saw the fierce, unyielding determination in her eyes. She wasn't a victim hiding under the covers. She was a brilliant professional stepping onto her battlefield. He gave a sharp nod. Matteo hurried over, placing the heavy laptop on the bedside table. Corinne pulled her chair close, wincing as her ribs protested the movement. Domenico stood directly behind her, his massive hands resting lightly on her shoulders, offering physical grounding and silent, unwavering support. Corinne looked at the screen. Lines of code and rapidly depleting account balances flashed in stark green against the black terminal. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Then, her thick, capable fingers hit the keyboard. She didn't just type. She orchestrated a symphony. Her hands flew across the keys with blinding speed. She bypassed the primary firewall by exploiting a forgotten, obsolete server node in the Miami warehouse system. He's routing it through a dummy corporation called Apex Holdings, Corinne muttered, her eyes tracking the data faster than Matteo could comprehend. He thinks the rolling cipher protects the destination IP. It doesn't. It just masks the origin. Can you stop the transfer? Matteo asked, leaning over her other shoulder. I'm not going to stop it, Corinne said, a fierce, unexpected smile touching her lips. If I stop it, the Calabrians keep what they've already taken. I'm going to reverse the flow. Domenico's hands tightened affectionately on her shoulders. Do it. Corinne executed a series of complex override commands, utilizing her deep, intimate knowledge of the company's hidden ledgers. She didn't just lock the Calabrians out, she hijacked the very tunnel they had built. Within 4 minutes, the rapid drain of funds halted. A tense silence fell over the bedroom. Then, the numbers on the screen began to climb. Green digits cascaded down the terminal as the millions of dollars Richard had stolen were forcibly yanked back from the Caymans and deposited directly into Domenico's secure, untraceable holding accounts. You didn't just get our money back, Matteo whispered in absolute awe, staring at the screen. You drained the Calabrians' operational slush fund. You just bankrupted their entire East Coast distribution network. Corinne hit the final key, severing the connection and bricking Richard's server permanently. She leaned back in the chair, totally exhausted, her chest heaving with exertion. It's done, she breathed out. Matteo looked at Corinne, then at his boss, profound respect radiating from his posture. I will go confirm the deposits, he said quietly, slipping out of the room and closing the doors behind him. Domenico slowly turned Corinne's chair around so she faced him. He dropped to one knee, a man of terrifying power, humbling himself before her. He took her hands, gently pressing his lips to her knuckles. You just saved my empire, Domenico said, his voice thick with raw emotion. You are magnificent. Corinne looked down at him, her heart hammering against her bruised ribs. But this time, it was not from fear. It was from the overwhelming, tidal wave of affection radiating from this dangerous, beautiful man. I guess we make a good team, she whispered shyly, a blush creeping up her cheeks. Domenico stood, carefully leaning down to slide his massive arms around her waist, mindful of her injuries. He lifted her effortlessly, cradling her full, soft curves against his hard, muscular frame. We do not just make a good team, Corinne, he murmured, his lips brushing against her forehead, sealing a promise that would alter the underworld forever. you are my queen. And anyone who ever makes you feel less than absolute royalty will answer to me." As she rested her head against his broad chest, listening to the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart, Corinne Harris knew she would never have to hide in the shadows again. She had walked into a boardroom expecting to lose her life. But instead, she had found a man whose huge hands were strong enough to catch her and gentle enough to hold her forever. Did this gripping mafia romance keep you on the edge of your seat? Corinne's journey from a terrified, underestimated accountant to the brilliant queen of an empire proves that true power lies in brains and bravery. If you loved seeing Domenico's fierce loyalty and how Corinne outsmarted the villains, hit that like button, share this dramatic story with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel